At 4 minutes past 9 on the morning of December 6, 1917, a single ship erased half a city in less than a second. The blast was so violent that witnesses swore the water of Halifax Harbour vanished, that for one impossible heartbeat, they could see the naked floor of the sea. This is the story of the Halifax Explosion, the largest man-made detonation in history before the atomic bomb. Almost every detail of it sounds invented. Almost none of it is. To understand what happened, you first have to understand what Halifax was in 1917. The Great War was in its fourth year, and this small Nova Scotian port had become one of the most important harbors on Earth. Halifax owned one of the world's great natural anchorages, a deep, sheltered basin connected to the open Atlantic by a slim channel called the Narrows. Convoys carrying men, horses, grain, and munitions to the killing fields of Europe assembled here. The city's population had swollen to around 50,000. Troopships, hospital ships, freighters, and warships crowded the water. And through that crowded, narrow channel, on the morning of December 6, two vessels were about to meet. The first was the SS Imo, a Norwegian steamer chartered to carry relief supplies to occupied Belgium, the words, Belgian Relief, painted in giant letters along her hull. She was empty, riding high in the water, and she was running a day behind schedule, her captain in a hurry. The second was the SS Mont-Blanc, a tired French freighter that had loaded her cargo in New York. And that cargo is the reason this story exists. In her hold sat roughly 2,300 tons of picric acid, a high explosive even more powerful than TNT, along with some 200 tons of TNT itself and about 10 tons of highly flammable gun cotton. Lashed across her deck, in stacked metal drums, was benzol, essentially high-octane fuel. Nearly 3,000 tons of explosives and accelerant, packed into one aging ship. She was, quite literally, a floating bomb. Under peacetime rules she would likely never have been allowed deep inside a crowded harbor. But this was wartime, German U-boats prowled the Atlantic approaches, and the rules bent. Just before 8:45 that morning, in the Narrows, the two ships found themselves approaching head-on. What followed was a slow-motion catastrophe of stubbornness and confusion, whistle signals exchanged and misread, courses disputed, each bridge expecting the other to give way. Who was truly at fault is still argued more than a century later, even the courts changed their minds. What matters is the result. The Imo's bow knifed into the Mont-Blanc's starboard side. The collision itself was almost gentle, a grinding shove at low speed. But it struck sparks. And the sparks found the benzol. Fire took hold of the Mont-Blanc's deck within moments, feeding on spilled fuel, climbing into a column of greasy black smoke shot through with strange, almost beautiful flashes of color as the drums burst one by one. Her crew knew precisely what was beneath their feet. Captain and le Medic ordered the ship abandoned, and the sailors rowed desperately for the Dartmouth shore, screaming warnings as they went. But they screamed them in French. On the waterfront of an English-speaking city, almost no one understood a word. And so the burning ship, unmanned and adrift, glided slowly toward the Halifax side, toward Pier 6, at the foot of the working-class district of Richmond, looking, to everyone watching, like nothing more than a spectacular dockside fire. That is the detail that haunts this story. The fire was beautiful. It burned for nearly 20 minutes, and those 20 minutes drew an audience. Workers crowded to factory windows. Sailors lined the rails of nearby ships. Boys and girls on their way to school stopped on the hillside to watch. Thousands of people stood at glass windows, faces pressed close, eyes fixed on the burning ship. The fire department's brand new motorized engine, the Patricia, came clanging down toward the pier. A boat crew from the cruiser HMS Highflyer rowed toward the Mont-Blanc, hoping to take her in tow. Almost none of them had any idea what she carried. A few people did. At the Richmond railway yards, a sailor burst in shouting that the burning ship was loaded with explosives. The dispatcher on duty, a 45-year-old telegraph operator named Vince Coleman, started to run, then stopped. He remembered the overnight passenger train from St. John, due in within minutes, carrying hundreds of people straight toward the waterfront. Coleman went back to his desk and tapped out a warning down the line. Accounts differ on his exact words, the version passed down through generations ends. Guess this will be my last message. Goodbye, boys. The precise wording is debated. What is not debated is that trains were stopped, that stations along the line learned of the disaster almost instantly because of him, and that Vince Coleman was still at his telegraph key when the wave hit. At 9:04 and 35 seconds, the Mont-Blanc ceased to exist. Her cargo detonated with a force later calculated at roughly 2.9 kilotons of TNT, about a fifth of the Hiroshima bomb, in the heart of a city, decades before humanity had words for such a thing. The ship was converted, in a fraction of a second, into a cloud of white-hot iron. Her hull was vaporized or flung for miles, a half-ton section of her anchor shank came down more than 3 kilometers away, and the barrel of one of her deck guns landed roughly 5 kilometers from the pier, near a lake behind Dartmouth. Temperatures at the center of the blast are estimated in the thousands of degrees. The shock wave moved faster than sound. It flattened the Richmond district, schools, churches, factories, and block after block of wooden houses, leveling well over a square kilometer of the city outright. It bent iron rails, snapped trees like matchsticks, and tossed railway cars off their tracks. The blast was felt over 100 kilometers away, and there are credible reports of it being heard on Prince Edward Island. The cloud of smoke and debris climbed kilometers into the winter sky, and out of it fell a greasy black rain that coated the ruins and the survivors alike. Then came the sea. The explosion had shoved the harbor water aside so violently that it returned as a tsunami, a wall of black water that, by some accounts, rose well over 10 meters against the shoreline. It helped hurl the IMO aground on the Dartmouth side, her captain and pilot already dead on the bridge. It swept through the small Mi'kmaq community at Tufts Cove, which was devastated, and because official records of that settlement were so poor, we will never know exactly how many of its people died there. The wave dragged wreckage, survivors, and the dead back out into the harbor. Roughly 1,600 people were killed instantly or nearly so. Hundreds more died of their injuries in the days and weeks that followed, bringing the toll to around 2,000. No one has ever fixed an exact number. 9,000 were injured, in a city of 50,000. And then there were the eyes. All those thousands of faces pressed against windows, watching the beautiful fire. When the shock wave arrived, every one of those windows became a blast of flying glass. Thousands of people suffered eye injuries. Hundreds lost sight in one or both eyes, dozens were left totally and permanently blind. In the days that followed, exhausted surgeons removed ruined eyes by the hundred. Halifax became, overnight, a city of the blinded, and the response to that catastrophe helped transform eye medicine and care for the blind across Canada. The horrors compounded one another. It was December, and nearly every ruined house had a coal stove burning when it collapsed. Fires broke out all across the wreckage, and rescuers had to listen to trapped survivors as the flames reached them first. Then, mid-morning, a new order swept through the ruins. Run, the naval magazine at Wellington Barracks was said to be on the verge of exploding too. Thousands of dazed, bleeding people fled uphill to open ground, and rescue work stalled for a crucial stretch of the morning before the danger passed. The second blast never came. Many rescuers, to their lasting credit, had simply refused to leave. Out of that day come stories that sound like pure invention. One tale claims a sailor was hurled nearly 2 kilometers through the air and lived. Versions of it appear in early accounts, but historians treat the details with caution. This one, though, is documented. Rescuers digging through the smoking ruins the next day found a baby girl, not yet 2 years old, alive beneath the ashpan of a stove. The metal had shielded her from fire and frost. Her name was Annie Liggins. Halifax knew her ever after as Ashpan Annie, and she lived into her 90s. And then, as if the city had not suffered enough, the sky opened. On December 7th, one of the worst blizzards in years buried Halifax under some 40 centimeters of snow. Survivors still trapped in wreckage froze. Rescue parties dug through drifts to reach the dead. The city's hospitals were shattered, many of its doctors wounded, its morgues overflowing into a school basement, where officials used the same careful identification system developed 5 years earlier for the victims of the Titanic, whose dead had been carried into this same harbor. Halifax was, and remains, a city with an uncanny relationship to disaster. But into that blizzard came an answer. Within hours of the first fragmentary reports, transmitted in part because Vince Coleman's warning had alerted the railway telegraph network, the state of Massachusetts began loading a relief train. It left Boston that same night and fought its way north through the storm, carrying doctors, nurses, and medical supplies. More trains and ships followed, and Boston's Relief Committee helped run hospitals, distribute clothing, and rebuild homes for months afterward. Nova Scotia never forgot. In 1918, Halifax sent Boston a Christmas tree in thanks. In 1971 the gesture was revived, and it has happened every single year since. Each December, Nova Scotia cuts a great spruce or fir and ships it south to stand, blazing with lights, on Boston Common, the city's official Christmas tree, a thank you note now more than a century old. There was, of course, a hunt for someone to blame. The official inquiry pinned the disaster entirely on the Mont-Blanc, her captain, her harbor pilot Francis Mackey, and the naval officer in charge of harbor traffic were arrested, and manslaughter charges were briefly pursued. The charges collapsed. On appeal, the courts eventually ruled what most historians accept today: both ships shared the blame, a chain of small misjudgments in a channel that should never have held a floating bomb. No one was ever convicted. Halifax rebuilt. The shattered North End rose again as the Hydro-Stone, one of Canada's first planned public housing districts. A memorial bell tower now stands on Fort Needham Hill overlooking the Narrows, and every December 6th, at 9:04 in the morning, the city stops and remembers. And there is one final, chilling footnote: decades later, the scientists of the Manhattan Project, trying to predict what an atomic bomb would do to a city, reached for the only real-world data that existed: the studies of Halifax. A forgotten Canadian catastrophe became a benchmark for the nuclear age. 2,000 dead. 9,000 wounded. A city leveled by a fire that people gathered at their windows to admire, and a telegraph operator who traded his life for a few dozen words. If you want more forgotten history that sounds made up but isn't, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.